Hello, horror movie fans. This is episode 3 of the Streaming Horror Movies podcast. I'm your host, Rick Hunter, and I want to thank you so much for joining me once again on this new episode of the Streaming Horror Movies podcast. So many horror movies pop up nowadays on the various streaming services, so my goal with the streaming podcast is to recommend to you those under-the-radar scary movies that may not get the attention they deserve, but they're truly scary films that leave you thinking about them for a good while after you've seen them, and you could definitely watch multiple times, and would also recommend them to your friends and family. So we're going to be discussing 3 of the very best horror movies currently on the streaming services. I'm going to talk about Scare Campaign, Catskill Park, and Downrange, and after that we'll have a bonus feature on this episode of the Streaming Horror Movies podcast. First up on the broadcast is Scare Campaign, which is or was released in 2016. And I watched it earlier this week, and I found it to be an entertaining and twisty thrill ride. From the Amazon Prime description, the crew of a reality TV prank show facing dwindling ratings decides to up the ante by setting up a terrifying prank in an abandoned asylum. Things go horribly wrong when they prank the wrong guy, and it's a night of blood-soaked horror, full of twists and turns that will satisfy any gore hound, and there is gore to be found in Scare Campaign, but what kept me watching from the beginning to the end is the twists and turns. It is a twisty movie and very entertaining. I gave it an 8 out of 10, and that is the movie called Scare Campaign, currently streaming on Amazon Prime if you're a member of Amazon Prime, and that comes free with the service. Next up is a movie called Catskill Park, which was released in 2018, also to be streamed on Amazon Prime. It's an intense and scary aliens in the woods found footage style film. The Amazon description reads, a normal camping trip turns into a nightmare when 4 friends are confronted with shrieking alien sounds from off in the distance. So this movie kind of surprised me when it first started out. I thought it was going to be a pretty much run-of-the-mill found footage kind of film. But I kept watching, and it really surprised me. It's a pretty creepy film, surprisingly good. So I do recommend Catskill Park. I give it a 9 out of 10 rating. It's sort of a mix of Cloverfield Lane and the Blair Witch Project. It is a very worthwhile, scary movie, Catskill Park, and I give it a 9 out of 10. So check it out on Amazon Prime. And next up, I'm going to be discussing Downrange, which is available if you have a Shudder subscription through Amazon Prime. Downrange, released in 2017, is an edge-of-your-seat suspense thriller about a sharpshooter targeting a group of friends with a broken-down vehicle out in a desolate area of the highway. I give Downrange a 6 or 7 out of 10. It's a pretty good flick. The thing about this film is that the horror of it does not come from zombies and vampires or ghosts, your usual horror themes, but about the true monsters in the real world we live in today. That is Downrange. I do recommend it. You can check it out on Shudder and Amazon Prime. So I'm going to be discussing a 4th movie on this 3rd episode of the Streaming Horror Movies podcast. A recommended scary movie of the week, not currently streaming for free. That is to say, it's available for streaming, but you have to pay a rental fee of $3.99 for this particular movie. The Possession of Michael King, a guy who's a skeptic of anything and everything having to do with the paranormal and supernatural. He invites the paranormal experts to conjure up whatever ghosts or demons they think they can so he can prove it's all nonsense. However, similar to John Cusack's character in the movie 1408, he comes to learn he made a hell of a mistake in his quest to disprove the supernatural realm. This would make a pretty decent double feature with 1408, speaking of that film, but The Possession of Michael King stands quite well on its own. If you're always on the hunt for a quality haunted house possession type flick, you should really dig The Possession of Michael King. There's an old episode of The Night Gallery that stars Leslie Nielsen. It's called A Question of Fear. And that episode, or this movie, The Possession of Michael King, kind of reminds me of that old Night Gallery episode, just to give you an example. But it's a pretty scary movie, so I do recommend you check it out. Hopefully it'll come back on streaming for free at some point. And one final feature on our podcast that I'm adding this week, how to find movies that are hidden on Amazon Prime or Netflix without actually looking up some kind of funky code or something. I discovered this myself, and you may have discovered it already, but when using the search function, notice the other titles that come up when you're doing a search. You'll usually see several titles that you won't necessarily see when scrolling through the genre sections. And I've found several myself that I've added to my watch list just by doing a search for a particular title, and I just noticed these other things that happen to come up. So that's a pretty cool thing you can notice when you're looking for a movie doing a search. So a quick summary of the horror flicks I'm recommending on this episode: Downrange, Scare Campaign, and Catskill Park. And if you decide you don't want to check out these movies in their entirety yourself, at least go out on YouTube and look up the trailers for them and make up your own mind if you want to invest your 90 minutes in watching them. I do recommend all three of them. And that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this episode of the Streaming Horror Movies Podcast. I do want to thank you so much for joining me once again. And if you have any suggestions for improvement on this show, just drop me an email. And that email can be found in the show description. Grab yourself a bucket of popcorn, fire up that horror movie, and have a great week, everybody. Until next time.